For over a century, Ford's factories in cities like Wayne stood as towering monuments to American manufacturing might, symbols of an era when the engine of the nation's economy roared at full throttle. But now, in a shocking twist, the unthinkable is happening. Ford is pulling out. In an explosive announcement, the automaker revealed plans to shift production of its Focus and C-Max models, along with a significant portion of its electric vehicle operations, overseas. The decision sent shockwaves through the nation, sparking a bitter clash between corporate survival and national loyalty, and exposing the brutal, cold realities of a globalized economy. Ford's move wasn't some rash, desperate gamble. It was a calculated pivot born from years of mounting pressure, a response to a perfect storm of skyrocketing production costs in the U.S. and a volatile geopolitical landscape. The root cause? Tariffs on critical materials like steel, aluminum, and lithium. Policies meant to protect American jobs that instead drove manufacturers to the edge. These tariffs, imposed during the Trump administration, created a labyrinth of higher costs for Ford, making it increasingly uncompetitive against global rivals who sourced materials cheaply abroad. Meanwhile, supply chain chaos, from pandemic delays to trade wars, left factories idle, production schedules in disarray, and profits bleeding away. But the true wake-up call came from an unlikely competitor, Tesla. While Ford grappled with legacy costs and cumbersome dealer networks, Elon Musk's sleek, vertically integrated empire was redefining what it meant to build cars. Tesla mastered lean, globalized EV production, and with it drove Ford to the edge of obsolescence. "We're not just competing with a company anymore," one Ford executive admitted. "We're competing with an entire system." The backlash was swift and unforgiving. Donald Trump, whose America First agenda had promised to revive U.S. manufacturing, framed Ford's decision as nothing short of treason. At a raucous rally, he thundered, "They're spitting on the workers who built them!" His response was predictable: threats of punitive tariffs, canceled government contracts, and calls for boycotts. Yet Ford didn't flinch. Behind closed doors, executives had crunched the numbers, and the truth was stark. Staying in the U.S. meant stagnation. Electric vehicles required lithium-ion batteries, and 80% of the world's lithium is processed in China. Tariffs had made domestic battery production unprofitable. Meanwhile, competitors like Tesla sidestepped the issue entirely by sourcing materials globally. Ford's choice was harsh: adapt or perish. The human cost of this decision was devastating. Towns like Wayne, where generations of families had relied on steady paychecks from Ford, now faced the grim specter of economic collapse. Auto unions erupted, accusing the company of sacrificing loyal employees for the sake of shareholder profits. Yet Ford's defense was as cold and pragmatic as it was unyielding. Without this pivot, Ford itself might not survive, and neither would the jobs. "What would you rather lose?" CEO Jim Farley asked pointedly. 2,000 jobs now, or 20,000 jobs later? Ford insisted it was still investing in US-based R&D and high-tech manufacturing. But the message was clear. The golden era of mass assembly line jobs was over. Future factories would be automated, demanding software engineers over wrench turners. The battle for the future of industry. This was more than a corporate strategy. It was a seismic shift in power dynamics. Governments had once held the reins, dictating terms to industry giants. But now companies like Ford, facing existential threats, were rewriting the rules. By offshoring production, they were calling the political establishment's bluff. Could politicians really force globalization to reverse course? The answer would determine the future of the American economy. If Ford thrived overseas, rivals like GM and Stellantis would likely follow, leaving Trump's vision of a manufacturing renaissance in tatters. But if the White House cracked down, it risked alienating businesses and accelerating America's decline in the EV race. Ford's decision was never just about cutting costs. It was the opening salvo in a much larger war, a war for the future of the auto industry. The true battle lines: technology, disruption, and survival. As the dust settled on the initial political firestorm, the real battle lines began to take shape. This wasn't just a conflict between Ford and the U.S. government, or even between Detroit and Silicon Valley. It was a fundamental clash over who would control the next era of transportation, and whether a legacy automaker could outmaneuver tech disruptors, geopolitical forces, and its own growing obsolescence. The stakes were nothing short of existential. Ford's leadership knew they weren't simply fighting for market share. They were fighting for survival in an industry that had already left them behind in key ways. The shadow of Tesla loomed large over every strategic conversation in Dearborn. Tesla had redefined what it meant to build a car, transforming vehicles into software platforms that just happened to have wheels. Tesla's mastery of vertical integration, from lithium mines to over-the-air updates, made traditional automakers seem like relics. Meanwhile, Ford was still tied to legacy systems, negotiating with dealerships, wrestling with union contracts, and refining combustion engines. Tesla had already transformed itself into a tech company. Ford had to do the same, overnight. Washington's dilemma: competing priorities. Washington's response to Ford's moves revealed a political system that could not reconcile its competing priorities. On one hand, Trump and his allies framed Ford's offshoring as betrayal of American workers, threatening tariffs and canceled contracts. On the other, the Biden administration quietly acknowledged the inevitable march of globalization, offering subsidies for domestic battery plants while looking the other way at Ford's overseas assembly lines. The dissonance was deafening. Politicians wanted the jobs and votes that came with traditional manufacturing, but the economics of the EV revolution demanded a break from the past. Caught in the middle were workers in places like Michigan, facing the brutal reality that their skills might not transfer to the software-driven factories of the future. Ford's gamble: reinvention or ruin. Ford's gamble wasn't just about geography. It was about reinventing the very idea of what a car company could be. Behind closed doors, executives greenlit Project T3, a moonshot initiative to build next-generation EVs on fully automated platforms. This wasn't about incremental improvement. This was total disruption. Factories where robots outnumbered humans 10-1. Batteries that charged in minutes and lasted 1,000,000 miles. A business model that eliminated dealerships entirely. The numbers were staggering. $50 billion in investments, partnerships with BMW on solid-state batteries, and a target price point of $25,000 that would undercut Tesla's cheapest offering. But the risks were equally monumental. If Project T3 failed, Ford would burn through its cash reserves and become a cautionary tale. If it succeeded, it might just prove that legacy automakers could beat Silicon Valley at its own game. The human cost: middle-class jobs disappearing. The human cost of this transition was impossible to ignore. For generations, Ford had been synonymous with stable middle-class jobs, jobs that built communities and sustained families. Now those jobs were being replaced by automation and offshoring, leaving workers with a painful choice: retrain for a tech-driven economy, or watch their livelihoods vanish. Unions fought back, but their leverage was dwindling. In an industry where software engineers were in higher demand than welders, the bitter irony was undeniable. Ford's ruthless pivot might be the only way to preserve any American jobs at all. Without radical change, the alternative wasn't a return to the glory days. It was irrelevance, a battle for power in the 21st century. In the end, Ford's story stopped being about cars at all. It became a referendum on power in the 21st century. The power of corporations versus governments, the power of data over steel, the power of adaptation over tradition. Ford's defiance marked a new reality, one where loyalty to nation-states mattered less than agility in global markets, where survival depended on out-innovating disruptors rather than out-lobbying regulators. The implications of Ford's gamble stretched far beyond Detroit. If the company could pull off this transformation, it would prove that even the oldest giants could learn to dance. But if it failed, it would serve as a warning to every industry facing existential disruption. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the rules of the game had changed forever, and there would be no turning back.